happy to give the floor to Iryna Bekeshkina, who's the director of Democratic Initiatives, named after Ilko Kucheriv. Iryna will make an introduction, will introduce our speakers, and will moderate our discussion. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to congratulate you all with the coming new year. We hope that the next year will be a difficult year, but the year 2016 was a very difficult year. We'll be talking about public opinion. How does public opinion evaluate the year 2016? We have experts here, and we hope that they will give us some forecasts for the next year. They will sum up the year that has passed. They will give some forecasts for the next year. I believe these are the best specialists in their fields. Volodymyr Fesenko will be talking about perspectives for political life. Glib Vyshlinskyi will be talking about economy. And we do hope that Oleksandr Sushko will join us, who will be talking about international relations. In the beginning, I will give the floor to the head of sociological service of the Razumkov Centre, with who we conducted this sociological survey, and he will tell us about the results of the year. Thank you. I also would like to wish you all the best for the next year, so the next year is better than this year. And I would like to start with our traditional New Year questions. In the end of every year, we ask the citizens of Ukraine about who they believe to be a politician of the year, what events they believe to be the events of the year in Ukraine and abroad. I would like to emphasize that we are conducting such a survey. We've been conducting it since 2000, and we ask always open-end questions. Most of the citizens called Petro Poroshenko as the politician of the year, and there are 9.5% of such citizens. I can tell you that that's the lowest indicator that the politician of the year would take, starting from 2000, when we asked this question for the first time. The second record, the previous one was also belonged to Petro Poroshenko. Last year, 12.8% called him politician of the year. Before that, the lowest figure was 15%. But despite the entire record, that's the entire record of the society, but not of a politician. And so the citizens still believe that he's the politician of the year. The second one was Groisman, 7.6%. Nadia Savchenko, 6.7% is the third one. Leshko, 5.7%. Yulia Tymoshenko, 5.3%. Mikhail Saakashvili, 4.5%. Boyka, 2.6%. And the rest politicians were not called so many. One of the specific features of this year is that the citizens are not very active. Very often they did not know who to call the politician of the year. As to the political event in Ukraine, most often they would call ATO as the event of the year. I would like to say that the event of the year is not always a positive event. This could be the negative event. That is the biggest event. 14.4% called ATO as the event of the year. Increasing the communal tariffs 8.5%, introducing electronic declarations 8.2%, and freeing Savchenko 6.9%, resignation of the old government and forming of the new government 4.8%, and the rest of the events account for less than 2%. As to political event in the world, here we have 37.4% of Ukrainians believe that the political event of the year in the world is elections in the US. 11.5% military intervention of Russia to Syria, and 10.8% without any details call wars of the in the world as the biggest event. 5.3% terrorism, and 2.3% the inflow of immigrants to Europe. If we compare the situation in the beginning of this year and in the end of this year, we asked the citizens to assess how has the situation in Ukraine changed in different spheres, and the citizens quite negatively assess the changes taking place this year. We every year asked to evaluate the changes in 23 spheres and the situation in the country. That is item 24 out of 23, and the situation in general only in one sphere. The citizens mention improvement of the situation. The number of people who believe that the situation has improved was higher than those who believe that the situation has deteriorated. And that sphere, according to the citizens, according to the society, is the defense capacity of the country. 39.8% of citizens believe that the situation in this sphere has improved. 21.3% believe that it has worsened. The rest believe that it hasn't changed, that they failed to give answers. As to other spheres, the citizens are sure that the situation has worsened or deteriorated. Talking about the picture in general, compared to the last year's assessment, for the first time after the Revolution of Dignity, this year the citizens give the assessment of the international image of Ukraine as such, where the situation has deteriorated. 32% of citizens believe that the international image of Ukraine has deteriorated, 27.4% that it has improved, the rest that it hasn't changed, and they failed to give an answer. Last year, the change of international image was assessed mostly positively. As to other spheres, there are mostly negative assessment, and the most negative concern economic sector, economic situation of the country. level of tariffs, level of stability, everything that the level of the well-being of the family. More than 70% of the citizens believe that the situation has worsened. Assessing the change of the situation in general, and most people believe that the situation has worsened. And then I will move to the questions. I cannot understand why the journalists are so much interested in that when there are no elections. I would like to mention the specific feature of the rating is that they include only the parties which are in the list, and that list, wherever the elections take place, we can say that the list differs which will have at the elections. But if the elections would take place in the nearest time, and if the list of the parties is like that, then the first place would be shared by Solidarność and Bekeshkina, for which 9.9 and 11% would vote. Another big indicator, 9% would be received by opposition bloc, Samopovich 7.6, Radical Party of Leshko 7.8%.
Непарламентських партій шанси пройти до парламенту мали б.
Out of non-parliamentary parties, the chances would be of a political party of Rabinovich, Громадянська позиція Гриценко, and maybe Mikhail Saakashvili, 4.7%. The rest would probably not get into the parliament, but that is quite hypothetical situation. If we had presidential elections, there would be 11 and 9% of those who would vote for Poroshenko, and for Tymoshenko 11 and 1%. Then the indicators would be Yuri Boyko 8.4%, Gritsenko 7.2%, Leshko 6.1%, Groisman 4.2%, Rabinovich 5.1%, Andriy Sadovy 3.4%, and the rest less. And now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Bekeshkina.
No. So we traditionally also carry out some surveys, expert surveys, and we are interested what changes were made in expert views and how expert assess events. Concerning a politician of the year, the experts believe that the most important politician now is Groisman, and also Poroshenko and Tymoshenko, but they placed Groisman at first position. Concerning disillusion of the year, the experts were dissatisfied with Savchenko this year, and for population this question was not raised, but for experts this question was put in questionnaire. Concerning the events, experts believe that the most important event in domestic policy of Ukraine was the launch of electronic declarations and start of fighting corruption for population. We had this question, but this issue was not at the first place. About negative events, experts say that this is that Ukraine didn't have a visa-free regime, and positive international events is that Ukraine was supported and annexation by Russia in official documents was called annexation, and sanctions against Russia continue, and this is positive. Also, traditionally, we ask experts about their assessment of some aspects of life of society according to 10 square. 10 is the best, so we may say that 5 is average satisfactory score, and we start this question from 2012. The positive results more than 5 is freedom of speech, assessed by experts, and the level of democracy is also a little bit higher, 5.8, and the rest is assessed. They assess it lower than 5, and some estimates grew. So according to experts, in 2013, 2014, 2.6, 2.7, and now 3.6. This is less than satisfactory, but some improvement can be seen. The level of corruption still high, 8 last year, and now 7.8. So this is negative. So entrepreneurship, not so bad, 4.6, and last year 4.1. And the forecast of development of the state is less than average, 4.3. So these are the assessments made by experts. Among main problems, so this is fighting corruption for many years. This is the main issue. Going back to survey of population, the question that is put each year, the trust the social institutions and separate politicians. I should say that concerning trust politicians, so no politician has positive. So each politician, the list was really long, you may see it, there is no trust. 2 women look better, Iryna Gerashchenko and Oksana Saraid, but this balance -22 and Saraid -32, and others have even less. And the biggest mistrust is to Ms. Gontareva, and -70 and -80. So this is not just mistrust, this is that negative prevails. Arsenij Yatsenyuk, -71, Alexander Turchinov, -61, Yuri Boyka, -60. So negative 50%. Lyashko, Savchenko, Tymoshenko, Rabinovich, Saakashvili, Yarosh, Poroshenko minus 44, Lutsenko 43, Parabin minus 33, Klitschko 41, minus 41, Sadovay minus 35, Sraid, as I said, and Lutkovska minus 32. Iryna Gerashchenko minus 22, and I forgot to say, Anatoly Gritsenko minus 21. So everyone is in negative and minus. So trust to institutions, we assess this information each year, and we may see some changes in this. We should say that there is interesting situation that those institutions whom people trust, this is the institution of military sector, and during 2 years people believe to volunteers, and institutions of defense are supported by people. Armed Forces of Ukraine 36 plus 33, and volunteer battalions, National Guard 28, and Border Service is high, and Church plus 30, but it is less than it was previously, and NGOs plus 8.5, Traffic Police plus 5. It is separated from other police units, and mass media plus 4. The highest level of mistrust among the institutions is mass media of Russia, minus 78, state apparatus, so the officials who work there, so minus 73. Courts minus 72, commercial banks minus 72, National Bank minus 65, Supreme Council minus 68, General Prosecutor's Office is also in the minus, and political parties as well. Then the government minus 55, President minus 45, police minus 44, and oblast administrations minus 34, regional administration minus 28, trade unions minus 27, National Anti-Corruption Bureau minus 29, and foreign media minus 22, SBU minus 20, and Ombudsman Human Rights minus 12, and local government minus 11. So in some regions, people trust more to local government in some places. This is the consequence of decentralization process, when in some regions they managed to, at local level, they were able to introduce some changes for the better. So we asked questions about whether people, in the situation of this mistrust to politicians, whether people feel the need for new politicians. We should say yes, they feel this. The majority, about 60%, believe that Ukraine needs new political leaders. And when we ask whether they see such political leaders, only 19% see those leaders. So this is political crisis, not only of existing politicians, but also of prospect politicians. So this was open-ended question about political leaders of the future. Here they see Savchenko 12%, Saakashvili 11%, Murayev 8%, Rabinovich 7%. Also they mentioned politicians. Lechko 6%, Tymoshenko 5%, Sobolev 6%, Sadovay 4%, and others even less. So this is the crisis of politicians. So people have negative attitude towards politicians who are in office of different political forces, and those who are in opposition and in coalition, to everyone. And also they do not see prospects and new politicians. Yes, they see, but when these political forces include such people, less people vote for them. We do not know what will happen next. So also there was a question about whether people are ready to sustain financial difficulties because of reforms. So 35% are ready, and half are not ready to have these difficulties, not because they do not believe in reforms. 1/3 believe that their financial position is not satisfactory. And there is decrease of Eastern vector. Last year, 16% supported the customs union. Now it's less, and also also an important issue about the introduction of visa-free regime with the European Union. We heard why this is important for Ukrainians, because people in Ukraine do not have money to travel. Even several percent can really travel to Europe. But we see that visa-free regime is really important for 40% of the population, 44% actually, and not important for 50%. But 44% of the population, I believe this is really a lot. This is considerable number. And also the issue about foreign policy. This was the attitude towards NATO and what is better for Ukraine. 40% believe that NATO is an important partner, and some of them support that Ukraine should not enter the bloc. Also, 6% believe that Ukraine should not enter NATO. So referendum, there was a question about protests. Despite all the difficulties during these times, people have the same level of... So when the national currency hryvnia fell, 40% of people were ready to protest against this, but they actually didn't, and now there is no increase in protesting. So
the 23% believe that in their towns or villages there might be massive protests. If such meetings do take place, then about 20% are ready to participate in them. 4% for sure, and 16% maybe. Despite such protest mood, almost 40% believe that next year there might be one more Maidan. Who will organize it and who will participate is another question, but people believe that it is possible. And as to the nearest tasks, most of the population believe that we need to settle the situation in Donbass and reach peace. Then the problems of economy, stimulate the development of economy, fighting corruption and corruptionists. Also regulating prices and decrease of tariffs are important. And also it is important to restore the industry and to create jobs. So the most difficult problems are Donbass and economy. And corruption. Donbass, corruption, and economy. And these problems are not resolved well. We have three experts here. We will ask them briefly about what was the year, what we can expect from the next year. If we give an assessment of the past of this year, it was very controversial. I believe this year there was a lot of inertia. There were not high expectations, but there were many disappointments related to the difficult social economic situation, some unpopular decisions. Also, increase of communal tariffs had an impact. Also, the expectations related to visa-free status, but the situation is the situation of paradox. On the one hand, this year we return to our old tradition. We live from the scandal to scandal. We had too many scandals this year, and that is also what negatively influenced the public opinion. But very often the negatives were related to positive. The year started with the parliamentary governmental crisis, but we managed to overcome the crisis and the situation was stabilized. The change of government has become a key internal political event this year, and it also helped political stabilization. There were no high expectations from that government. It didn't look as bright as the previous one. But what is important, it is slow, it is with problems, but the course of reforms continues. And that is recognized even by our international partners, and that is the positive trend. Next to relative political stability, we have started coming out of economic crisis. And this is positive, I believe. Then some other positive events, they are probably not very political, but I would like to mention them. When I was answering the questionnaire, I believe there was such a positive event as the victory of Jamala at Eurovision. That is our asymmetric reply to annexation of Crimea and Russian aggression. We lack victories and successes. And let us have at least such victories. Let there be more of them. Despite the fact that there is some inertia in economic situation, dissatisfaction with the rate of reform, rate of fighting corruption, but there's also, we can see some positive trends. Finally, new anti-corruption institutions started operating. They lack professionalism, experience, but they started to operate. And what has been mentioned, the e-declarations, the launch of e-declarations is also one of the preconditions of further fighting against corruption. We need to strengthen, to enhance these rates. Despite all the problems, all the disappointments and dissatisfaction, there are some positive trends. There's some small ray of hope. It is important to strengthen that ray. As to the next year, the situation is very complicated. On the one hand, the trends of inertia may continue. On the one hand, traditionally, everyone's waiting for early parliamentary elections, but they don't take place. This is another topic. There are many supporters of early elections, but if they take place, they will not change the situation to the better. They will complicate it. It will be very difficult to create a new efficient coalition, but if nothing changes, then the probability of early parliamentary elections next year will not be high. There might be attempts after the moratorium on the votum of distrust to the government ends in the middle of May, but if there are some positive economic trends and some political stability, then this will not happen. But the level of dissatisfaction and the level of tension is so high that there is such a risk. Alexander will be talking more about that. I would like to mention that for us, international situation gets complicated, not just for us, but for the whole of the world. There are many crisis trends in the European Union that all complicates the implementation of the European strategy for Ukraine. The problem with finalizing ratification of the association agreement shows that, but this is not our problem. This is the problem of European Union, and change of elites in many leading Western countries will become another factor of the situation being not definite. This does not adapt the optimism to resolving the key problem for Ukraine, the conflict in the east of Ukraine. And this year we will see it. We've seen some crisis trends. There was no escalation, that's positive, but the war continues. Fewer people were killed, there were fewer shellings, but this war of small intensity unfortunately continues, and most probably it will continue next year. But the change of leadership in the US and France in the end of the year, and there might be some corrections in Germany, and this, I'm afraid, can also help delay the negotiation process. Putin will try to reduce the sanctions, to restore the dialogue with Western leaders. So the situation is not that optimistic here, but the enhancing of the defense capacity of Ukraine and Ukrainian diplomacy helps us to resolve the tasks to continue maintain the current situation. Thank you. Now Glib Vyshlinskyi. The total mood of people is the result of the economic situation. Very often this dissatisfaction is transferred to the spheres which have not changed or which have changed to the better. In our survey, some people believe that the system of democracy
можливо, немає. Але оця загальна така, знаєте, загальний такий негатив, який перш за все вони відчувають.
There's some general negative which is felt in the economic sphere is transferred to everything. What can we expect here?
Корупція.
Everyone's talking about corruption. Everyone's saying that we need to fight corruption. I haven't seen a single civil servant who would say no, but we failed to achieve it. Thank you. I will start from...
В прес-релізі ви теж бачите. Насправді дуже показовими є відповіді на
So the answer to the question, how has the situation in Ukraine changed? We see the economic situation in the country, the balance is very negative, -73. But it's better than last year. The level of well-being of your family is a little better than last year. Pension support, pension maintenance. Item 14, the level -45.6 is much worse than last year. Payment salaries -51.1 is at the level of the last year. And the last one, level of prices and tariffs, is -87, but it's a little better than last year.
Ще одне підтвердження того, що я бачив вже протягом
That's another confirmation of what I've seen in the last years, that people do not trust the data of survey or statistical data. But I see how the statistical data and the survey data are very much similar. When we look at the results of 2016, we see macroeconomic stabilization. The level of inflation has reduced. This year we will have about 12%. We see the increase of real salary by 9%. That is wages adjusted by the consumer price index. We see the increase of private consumption. We see even bigger growth of investments. And this year, the construction, which is the replacement of private investments, because people cannot buy shares, they do not invest into business, and they believe that the real estate will always grow in price, and they buy square meters. Mistrust to bank and other financial institutions led to higher trust to bricks and concrete. And looking at correlation between pension and salary, we see that the increase of real salary was much higher than the increase of social payments. And we'll see the same in 2017. The minimum salary will grow, but the pensions and social payments will not be increased as much. This difference will form the pressure in the society, and it could be adjusted only if this change of minimum salary leads to increase of social payments. But we will see more tension between people who work and those who receive pensions the next year. We see some increase of economic growth. Не понимаю.
Ми побачили.
Last year we see this year there is resumed the IMF program.
I and International Monetary Fund believe that nationalization of private bank is really a good event that worked as financial pyramid that provided only benefit to their owners, and also budget 2017 adoption by the parliament with less deficit, and also we will see what will happen next, but we see that the goals of macroeconomic stability are high on the agenda for this government and for former government. And also positive changes are the adoption of law on introduction of changes to tax code that can improve significantly the situation and prevention of corruption in this area. For 2017, what we see that the basic scenario does not envisage economic and political turbulence. There is hope for growth, economic growth, 2 or 3%. Also, small repayments of debt, foreign debt, and there is mistrust to politicians. But we hope that we won't have negative events because of it. About good changes, about basic scenario, there are some good events and some challenges. Why we see everything in the negative, and why we see this low level of trust to president, to power on the whole, to any political force, low rate of economic growth after 17% fall, and then the fall that was in 2008, 2009, and also a lot of people remember not only 2013 but also about 2008. According to the survey, they believe that the situation decreased, but then there was some rise. Also, repayment of foreign debt during next year's 2.6 billion, then it will increase to 7.5 billion in 2019. So there will be parliamentary and presidential elections that year, and this combination of events won't give us hope, and this year will be really difficult. In order to prevent crisis in 2018, 2019, what we should expect, we should demand that during the first quarter, the program with IMF should continue. Two important decisions were taken: budget and nationalization of private bank. Two issues on the agenda: pension reform that will envisage the increase of number of years, and also adoption of law on agricultural lands and unblocking the sales of agricultural lands. And also one more important issue that is of importance is Anti-Corruption Bureau responsibilities, to provide them broader responsibilities. And we see that experts from different areas, they mentioned two main problems: corruption and mistrust to judicial system. So these are the main. And international investors also confirmed this. And they were questioned by Dragon Capital, and they mentioned this factors. Russian aggression was on the third place, and we should understand that the effect for economic growth is impossible without solving these problems. And also economic problems, fighting corruption, and there should be also fiscal service reform. And Prime Minister said that it is on the agenda for the next year, and also the issue of privatization. 2016, this is the third year after Maidan, and we didn't see any big-scale privatization, and it shows that money are siphoned away from state enterprises, and there are interested parties in this. They just get money from this, all those officials and politicians. And also important issues on the agenda is to accelerate the rate of economic development, and also there should be proper corporate governance, and also supervisory board for Privatbank was created, and we know that in Oshchedbank and Ukr-Eximbank, in times of Yanukovych, they financed Kluyev and other people. So this is done with the use of our own money. So there is also reduction and optimization of budget spending in such areas as education, health, law enforcement, and we see that there are reforms foreseen for 2017 in these areas. Without reduction of budget funding, we won't be able to provide better conditions to increase development of our economy, and also nationalization of Privatbank lifted the threat for financial sector. After this, we should demand from the National Bank and from the Parliament the liberalization of the flow of capital that is now regulated by legislation adopted at the end of 1990s. And judiciary reform is also planned for 2017. This is the main event of the next year. Thank you. And lastly, we are going to speak about foreign policy, and this is really important issue. This is the last but not the least. If we look at expert survey, the majority of experts say that there are some positive trends, the continuation of sanctions against Russia, recognition that Russia is the occupant, and the implementation by Ukraine of all the requirements concerning visa-free regime. Also negative is that the state visa-free regime was not provided this year, negative results of referendum in the Netherlands. And when I look at what our experts forecast for next year in foreign policy, we cannot say that they provide some positive view. Visa-free regime with the European Union, our experts, they forecast this, and we will ask Mr. Sushko about it, and also the difficulties in foreign arena, cancellation of sanctions against Russia, decrease of attention of the West towards Ukraine, pressure on Ukraine concerning the Minsk agreement implementation, and so there is a negative trend in the forecast of the experts. What can you say about it? Thank you for this question. Thank you for this invitation. If we compare the survey, if we analyze the data that we see, this is really interesting. First, I focused my attention on the fact that these forecasts concerning Euroscepticism, they are not really seen now. Maybe it will happen in the future. There are some factors, global, regional factors, that affect on the increase on some national egoism in Europe. And in Europe there is Euroscepticism on the rise. So we may say about the data presented, but this is a part of forecast. Maybe this part of Euroscepticism, it will increase next year. And here we see the major change in the attitude towards foreign directions. Before 2013, then Ukrainian society in some proportion was divided into Western vector and proponents of Eastern vector. And now the main division is not between these groups, because pro-Russian group is marginal now. It's about 10 to 15%, and here we see 11. And the main division is between those who see international prospects in integration towards the West and those who don't believe in such prospects. So we can call them Eurosceptics, or those who believe that Ukraine should focus on its own issues and do not care about international integration. And there is no such an option in the survey, but in different surveys we may see that this segment of society is about 1/3 of voters. This is big enough segment, and it means that in political context, some political projects will arise that will propose themselves as a representation of these views. Maybe we will see some political forces that will more actively promote the ideas of non-participation of Ukraine in some foreign projects. At the same time, that we see that Europe remains important for Ukraine, positive orientation we should aspire to, but the components of this orientation can be different, and not always we see the situation as unbiased. So about visa-free regime, if we analyze bare figures, it may look like that society is divided half by half, but if we look at real structure of society and pay attention to what number of people really travels abroad, and what amount of people have foreign passports, we may see that according to different estimates, about 20–25% of people have foreign passports. So those people for whom free travel is important is higher than the number of passports on hands. That's why this 44% is high percentage. It is evident that here there is a factor present that is not directly related to personal prospects of people. In this sense, Ukraine does not differ from our neighbors. If we look at such country as Turkey, Georgia, we have data that this number of people that travel abroad, the percentage is the same as in Ukraine. if we look at political spectrum, if we see it through international prism, we may see that evidently there is some coincidence in support of different political parties at the same time. If proponents of Russian vector support one or two political leaders, pro-Western vector is really a wide spectrum of parties and politicians. So people, they support Western vectors, and there is a large spectrum of representation in this vector. But also there is some mistrust to figures, to politicians, about the events, political events, and their influence on situation in Ukraine. For me, this is not a surprise. The estimate of elections of the US elections. So these elections happened recently, and if they happened at the beginning of the year, maybe the assessment of this event was different. We live and see. So also the close event influences the most. And the referendum in the Netherlands, it directly influences the situation in Ukraine, but it is not that important for Ukrainian voters. But I, as an expert, I disagree with this. About challenges for the next year, it's not a secret that the situation for international, in order that we were helped by different countries, the situation is not good for us. International community is not in good shape. They have difficulties, and some people got disillusioned. But this is not something that really threatens world order. The world is rebuilt, and a lot of things, they now work differently, and it is more difficult to get support. And Ukraine should be ready to rely on its own forces. And this is evident. There are more deep conclusions, but we focus mainly on recommendations for the next year. And
we say that Ukraine will probably have to put a lot of efforts to get new friends there, where we believe there are no friends. We believe that we demonized the environment of Trump, and now we need to understand who is there. We need to look for channels of communication, work with this administration, who has very clear characteristics, and we need to use such characteristics. I mean, Ukrainian diplomacy should do it. We need to be pragmatic. We need to try and resolve the situation in the manner where understanding of where we can find benefit prevails. And by this benefit, I mean not just material benefit, We, of course, need to work with American investors, but we need to look for benefit in the sense that Ukraine should become more of a story of success. And then there will be more sense for such leaders as Trump to work in the direction of Ukraine, because they are afraid to be together with losers. That is the psychotype of Trump and many people who are alike, not to be together with losers. And for Ukraine, the task is not to demonstrate that it is the part of the world which falls, but it's part of the world which is some resource for the future. And that is an interesting task. It is obvious that we'll continue addressing the issues, certain issues in European direction, visa-free regime and ratification of association agreement. But here very little depends on Ukrainian side. But resolving these issues creates many grounds for perceiving Europe and Ukraine. We say that Ukraine has done its part of the work, but the influence of this situation on the opinion on public opinion, on positioning of political parties is very big. And the figures that we receive in a year will depend on how we address these issues. Thank you. Questions?
Наскільки це можливо? Це оптимізм.
Unfortunately, the question was not asked into the microphone. If it is to me, I don't remember the quotation. Mr. Turchinov said there will be the very big change, but this is subjectively we can say that there is a change. Today we have the situation which is of semi-frozen conflict, but what is this big change in the situation of the frozen conflict? I believe that's more. That was more of a PR statement, but not the result of the analysis of a specific situation. Unfortunately, I believe we have big chances that the situation will stay without big changes. I don't see any preconditions for significant changes into this or other direction, talking about settling the situation in Donbass. On the one hand, there are Minsk agreements which are interpreted by the sides differently, and the difference in interpretation hampers the further movement. There are more clear Russian proposals which are Ukraine can return the control over these territories, but on Russian terms, which will mean the disassembly of Ukraine as the state. And people in Ukraine understand it, and no one is ready to agree to such terms. There's a position of our Western partners who would like probably to get some success, the progress that will help them to report to the voters that they have achieved the success in settling the conflict in Ukraine. But even they are more realistically believe that there are not many chances in resolving this conflict in the near future. But talking about the very drastic change, it is hardly possible, even without looking at what is the condition of the situation with the armed forces of Ukraine. The situation with the military balance in Donbass depends on external factors. Enhancing defense capacity of Ukraine is a significant factor that influences this situation, but it cannot lead to a big change to military resolving of the conflict. There are very few chances because external factor is very powerful and it's higher than any current or potential military resources of Ukraine. I agree with your assessment. I am not such a big optimist as Mr. Sushko. I can agree. Stabilization of the contact line. That's the first year when there was no seizure of new territories which were under the control of Ukraine. There were no such dramatic events like near Debaltseve in the beginning of 2015. But there are no preconditions to expect some drastic change. The minimum task, which is important, is to maintain what we have, not to allow further escalation of the conflict, to enhance defense capacity, to demonstrate the resource of defense. Near Svetlodarskach, for example, and when there was any attempt to move forward, was repelled. That's the main thing. And not to surrender diplomatic positions in negotiation process. Iryna mentioned that there might be the attempts to press on us, fulfill Minsk agreements on conditions which are close to Russians. And now feel some panic. Kissinger plan. There's no plan, but people are discussing it. That Trump will agree with Putin without us, and they will force us to do it. That's not realistic. Any agreements where there's no Ukraine, which do not correspond to internal political realities of Ukraine, will not be realistic. I will remind you. Once on the 20th of February 2014, they agreed on something, they signed something, but that paper did not take any of our realities. They cannot come to agreement without us. They can take into account our situation. And this year, 2016, I believe Ukrainian diplomacy has become more severe, and that's a big plus. We need to continue do like that. And as to the victory, we'll act according to circumstances. If we see some weak spot in Russia, then we'll get some chance. But we need to be ready to new challenges, external challenges, and react to them. Let's not be optimists here. It's better to be prepared realists. No other questions? My question is to Andriy. When you did a survey on possible presidential elections, did you consider the scenario of the second tour? No. Again, I know that journalists love ratings. The ratings is quite an applied issue. When there are lists, irrespective of what type of election this is, but rating becomes an applied thing. Now, the situation is more than hypothetical. Even based on the data that we have, if we consider the second tour, there should be minimum 5-6 pairs. And this will bore the respondent. And that's not realistic. We don't have any elections now. I agree with the colleagues. I don't believe that the early elections will take place in 2017. So I don't see any need to consider the second tour. Sociologists ask such questions to analyze the general support of some politicians, political parties, whether they're losing support, whether they're gaining more support. This is about the analysis of political situation. I'd like to add, I agree that the current rating, they're quite virtual. They reflect certain moods. But the real election situation is different. Talking about elections, if the probability of early parliamentary elections exists, suddenly there's some governmental or parliamentary crisis, but to have early presidential elections, for that some force majeure should take place. It's hardly probable. But ratings of opposition bloc are quite high. But now, look at elections this year. The elections in 7 constituencies. The representative of opposition bloc didn't win in a single one. Now, there are elections in territorial communities. What we see, Bekeshkina, Poroshenko bloc and Nash Krai dominate. Where's the opposition bloc? Or another example, a TV party with a high ratings, За життя, for life. Did they participate in elections? I haven't seen that. It exists virtually, but they don't participate in the real election process. So the differences between the real election process, who wins there, and virtual ratings, please pay attention to that. I would like to remind you of the elections of 2014. The People's Front did not exist before the elections as a political party. They were formed and achieved success. Ratings of Samopomich and Sama were very low, and they have become one of the winners at parliamentary elections. We need to remember that. When it comes to real elections, I found your press release of January 2003. We had 2 years before the elections. It's not that I am the supporter of Yushchenko, but just to say that the situation is different. Sometimes it's different. 27% trust Yushchenko, 59% of trust. Those who do not believe, 33.3%. The positive balance before the elections, 25 plus 25%. Now we don't have anyone with a positive balance. Yushchenko was there before. In 2002, the Nasha Ukraina won at parliamentary elections. But as a phenomenon, he appeared in 2001. Then there were big expectations. Now there's a phenomenon of total mistrust. Total trust is 4%, the highest indicator. That's very low. But the balance of mistrust, that is about the skeptical negative mood. Everyone was signing coalition elections, and they promised that the elections will be with open party lists, but there is a probability that this will happen. The public will support such changes of election legislation. If this happens theoretically, then this will change the situation with ratings, because some people are popular, others not, and this could change the situation. I tried to model it according to the, if we still have the mixed system, about 100 MPs, majoritarian. It will be very difficult to create a new coalition. Not a single party has enough support. If Bekeshkina wins, who will they create the opposition with Opoblok and Muraev? Then, for example, Poroshenko bloc, then maybe Leshko, Samopomich, Saakashvili, Gritsenko, and they will not have the majority of votes. That's the problem. On the second tour, if you're interested, I remember okay, and the time is over. Thank you all. I congratulate you with the forthcoming holidays. And the year ahead will be very intensive and very interesting. And my favorite slogan is, till we are alive, nothing has been resolved finally.